Welcome, family. At Kingdom Academy, we equip parents in spiritual warfare training so you can raise up your children as spirit warriors, well prepared to stand against the principalities and powers of darkness. Today, I want to share with you about homeschooling from the perspective of a homeschooler who graduated from homeschooling. I want her to share with you the benefits, the common misconceptions, the negatives and the positives, and how it all worked out in the end. That homeschooler is actually me. I homeschooled all the way through. I was the oldest of 8 kids, and there were many negatives and positives for me. But interestingly enough, as I grew into adulthood and I became mature in the Lord, I began to look back and understand that there was more value there than I originally saw or understood when I was in my younger years. So when I was in my 20s, if you would have asked me, what did you think about homeschooling? I would have said, I will never homeschool my kids because I thought it was terrible. But that's because of a lot of other situations that had happened in my life that had caused trauma and had caused me to have trouble dealing with many things. And none of that was because of homeschooling. It was because of other things. But honestly, if I would have went to public school during that time, I probably would have had more problems piled on top of those problems. So I'm thankful that I was homeschooled in that sense for that too. Then I would have probably told you that I was also in disfavor of it because I had to help homeschool my siblings. And because of that, I believed at that time in my younger years that I lacked because I was so busy helping my other siblings school with their schooling that there were things I didn't believe I got enough attention in certain subjects. Now, when there was areas where the subjects weren't able to be covered by my mom, then we would have somebody help. So, for instance, with math, we had a neighbor boy, their kids were also homeschooled, and he would help me. He'd come over once or twice a week and help me with math, which was very helpful. So everything always worked itself out. Like if there's an area where it's your weak spot, you can always figure out how to fill it in. It's just how homeschooling works. It's so flexible. It's so easy to go with the flow of your child's learning process that way, which is so beautiful. But because I was broken in other ways, I grew up blaming homeschooling for that. But eventually, those things worked themselves. I got into healing and I got into growing in the Lord in different ways. And because of that, I began to realize it had nothing to do with homeschooling, where I was struggling in all those areas. But one of those areas that I was struggling in at the time was loneliness. Even though I was the oldest of 8 kids, even though we had many friends who were always over playing, there was always probably at least 16 kids at the house because everybody had at least one friend or cousin or somebody over at the house. There were so many kids there. So did we have a social life? Mega social life. We had co-ops, we had church groups, we had family friends, we had family. There was just, the concept of loneliness in homeschooling is a matter of your own ability or lack of ability to give your kid a social life, period, whether your kid's in public school or homeschooling. It's also a matter of who do you want your child to hang out with? Do you want your child hanging out with public school kids who are living lives in their family that's very different from the life you may live in your family as a faith-based family, a family of believers? So that's really important to pay attention to as well. But that loneliness for me in that time of my life was a result of many other situations in my life that was going on. And I didn't understand that then because there was a lot of repressed memories, a lot of repressed trauma that I was dealing with from my past at that time. So because of that, I blamed that stuff on homeschooling, but it really wasn't homeschooling. Loneliness is a state of mind. It's a matter of belief, identity. Social skills can sometimes factor in, but if you are walking in the Lord, then you'll find yourself on this lonely road often. And what really matters is if and when you come to those places in life when you are lonely, how do you deal with it? Do you know how to handle it? Do you know how to work through it? Those are things you can learn in homeschooling. Those are things you can teach your children in homeschooling. But if you don't know them, then you won't be able to teach your kids. But don't worry, the public school teachers definitely don't know how to teach your kids that. But you can learn how to do that, and then you can teach your children that. And then as a homeschooler, you have the time to do that, to teach your kids those things. And the other things we had, because we were taught all day, every day through our lives, how to respect authority. That doesn't mean respecting bad authority. That doesn't mean respecting like somebody who's doing something wrong, even if they're in authority, but godly authority. And we knew how to carry conversations with adults, which seemed to very much impress many adults. How do your children know how to speak to adults like this? Because we naturally were around adults a lot. As much as we were around children, we were also around adults. We were around, because we were in the homeschooling communities, we were around adults who they understood that concept. And so nobody spoke down to us as children because homeschoolers respect children for the most part. So one of the other things, I guess, that I was really uncomfortable with in homeschooling growing up was grades. And that only came when comparison came, because we did a star system instead of grades of like A, B, C, D kind of thing. We did 1 star or 3 stars, and they were little sticker stars that were stuck on our schoolwork. And basically they just represented, like, 1 star basically meant you didn't even try, you didn't even study. 2 stars means you tried and you did well, but you need to work a little harder next time around. And 3 stars meant you got it, you figured it out, and you did really well. And that was it. So there wasn't like all this pressure, because most of the time, especially because we were homeschoolers and we desired to do well, we usually got 3 stars because we were doing the work and we were getting it. And if there was an area that we were really struggling in and not getting it, then that was an area where we would either put it on the back burner for a little bit, which happened with me with like history. But interestingly enough, because I was a creative and I loved writing, years later, as I was writing a certain story, there was historical things I wanted in the story. I went and researched it, and I fell in love with history. And suddenly I began to know history really well. So it's a matter of that ebb and flow with homeschooling that makes it so great. Because sometimes if you're not in the mindset to receive something and learn it, it doesn't matter how much someone shoves it down your throat. You're going to learn what you need to learn to get by, and then you're going to forget all of it because you have no passion for it. But if your child is learning it when they're in a state of mind of desiring to learn it, then they're going to absorb it like a sponge, which is amazing. So I think that's really important to understand that. And then as I got into college, I was majoring in physiology and anatomy. And I was so nervous that I was going to do terrible because I'm a homeschooler and whatever. I did amazing. I was on the dean's list. I had really good study skills. I knew how to self-research. So I was actually learning way above and beyond what they were giving me to learn, because I knew how to dig into something, how to learn about it on a deeper level than just what a textbook or a teacher would say to you. And then I helped my study partners because I knew all these really cool study techniques that I had learned and researched when I was learning in school. Still, in my mind, I was dissing myself and saying how terrible I was, and if only I wasn't a homeschooler, while I was completely excelling. I was saying all that while I was excelling. But that was a mindset, and it came from so many other things. And then testing. Many people ask about testing, like, how are you at testing as a homeschooler? Well, because of my mindset, I believed I wasn't good, but I actually excelled at testing. I did very well at it. It was just that broken mindset that needed healed and restored, but through a lot of other things that needed faced and dealt with. And that's the same for anybody in life, whether you're an adult, whether you're a child. And so I really believe the benefits of homeschooling were that I really learned critical thinking skills. I went from introvert to extrovert as I grew in life. And I learned where I belonged as I learned more about the Lord, and then my walk with Him grew. And when that happened, that's when all those other shifts began to happen. And that research and that growth and that change came because of the things I understood as a homeschooler. It's interesting because homeschooling really cultivates that growth mindset. It really cultivates those critical thinking skills and that ability to research, that ability to seek and to learn constantly. And I treasure that more than anything else I learned in life, other than the things I've learned from the Word of God. And so, yeah, did I fit in with the world? No. And I'm so thankful I didn't. But not only did I not only fit in with the world, but I knew how to defend my stance of why I didn't fit in with the world. And I was thankful that I didn't fit in. I didn't want to fit in with them because I knew where I belonged. So I also want to cover that one of my greatest fears growing up was public speaking, which is really interesting because now I do that. But the first time I was invited to speak publicly, I was really nervous. And all those fears and blames to homeschooling came back into my mind, which was really interesting because at that point I was really grateful for homeschooling. But all the blame came back into my mind about it as I considered it and thought about it. But after that speaking event, I was in awe because I realized that all those fears and nerves and worries and concerns were a lie from the enemy, for one, but also they were just lies in my head, period. Because it wasn't about how well I spoke as a speaker, but it was about the story, the specific story that I was sharing with that specific audience. And the love of stories came back to me. And I realized how that story affected others and was life-changing to them in certain areas. And that totally killed my fear of public speaking because I realized that being able to speak and share certain stories with certain people serves others. And that was just what made like the biggest shift for me from public speaking and the fears of public speaking. And now I really enjoy that. But I also think that comes from that mindset that I was trained to have as a homeschooler. And I think that's really valuable. Now, as I've grown older, I've realized the difference because I've seen through my friends who have kids in public school to my friends who are homeschooling children, the difference. And it is really big. It is a huge difference, not just in the children, but I actually see the difference in the parents and in their parenting styles in relation to those who homeschool versus those who put their children in public school. There is a big, super steep learning curve there because a homeschooling parent is fully invested in the learning process of their child. I know those who have their children in public schools and they're invested in their children's learning process. But you can only be invested to a certain extent because you're also depending on others who you don't know. Sure, you can do teacher meetings, but that does not make you know somebody. And so you're depending on somebody you don't really know to teach your child. And you don't know what's being said or done in those moments when you're not with them because they don't believe the same way you believe for the most part. And it's just, there is a difference. I have seen the difference and I would go into that a lot more, but those will be other episodes. And if you sign up and get some coaching with me, or if you join the community, then you'll probably hear a lot more about that inside. For now, I'm going to digress on that and just say, as a homeschooler, I have seen the difference, and I truly have a passion and a heart to see parents homeschool their children. And yes, if I had children now, I would totally homeschool. Because of the way things worked out in life and God's plan for me, that was not the plan for me to have children like that. But I do have children in the Lord, and I have a heart and a passion to minister and to disciple to those who need help. I desire to minister and serve you as parents and encouraging you in these things, in parenting, in homeschooling, in whatever areas it is you might be struggling in, and just walking alongside you and giving you that biblical support and encouragement. But you have to have that mindset where you're willing to receive and you're willing to understand that sometimes another can see something you can't see because they're not walking in the middle of it. If you're able to receive that and see that, then perhaps getting on a free strategy call with me and seeing if I could serve you and help you in these areas might be something you might want to look into. But I desire to do this because I truly believe that this is how we stand against the agendas of the enemy. Thanks so much for joining this conversation with us. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. For episodes, offers, or guest information, please visit us at rainandjoy.com/Spiritware Academy or join us on Instagram at rainandjoy and click the link in the bio for access.